Hey, welcome back. It's your boy Will J. Let's get into some deck brewing shenanigans. Now, if you haven't watched any of our previous videos, I want to let you know that here, we're not focused on the most optimized or tuned way of building a deck. Instead, we feature real-life, play-tested, and piloted builds that focus on interaction, synergy, and winning the game, but hopefully, more importantly, winning over your friends. We'll cover themes, card choices, deck stats, and lastly, some pilot tips to make sure that in a game between friends, you win those tiebreakers. So today, our featured commander is Olivia Crimson Bride. She's a 3/4 vampire noble with flying and haste that costs 4 and a black-red. Whenever Olivia attacks, she essentially brings a creature back from our graveyard that's also attacking, but with the downside that it will exile itself if you no longer control a legendary vampire. The overarching theme of the deck we're gonna be running is Ruthless Aggression, with a sub-theme of Tag Team mode. It sounds very WWE, and maybe I've been watching Wrestling Bios' Reliving the War series a bit too much, but if you like the smell of what we're cooking, I'll be covering card choices around our usual sub-themes of Ramp, Removal, and Draw, and then deck-specific sub-themes of Loot, Reanimate, Finishers, and something we like to call UBP or Utilities, Bombs, and Pets. Our commander's got the attitude, she's aggressive. Now let's go over what cards can take her bloodlust to the next level instead of keeping it PG. For Ramp, I won't go over the typical staples, but I do want to note a few things. Everybody loves their 2-drop rocks, but since we're running a high curve, 3-drop rocks or higher are actually fairly viable in this deck. Sword of the Anime and Sword of the Hoe are both a little pricey wallet-wise, but this deck likes to attack, and consistent ramp helps smoothen out the curve. Treasure production has also become a thing, and Goldspan Dragon is amazing always, as is Curse of Opulence. But again, if these don't fit the budget, we can always go with Bucknard's Everfull Purse. It creates about 2 to 3 treasures, and yeah, it ramps your opponents, but players are greedy. This thing is gonna find its way back to you soon enough. A card I want to highlight and already gets my fruit seal of approval is Coveted Jewel. This card is like Super Monarch. It's a 6-drop rock that produces 3 and draws 3, and I know what you're thinking. Oh snap, everyone's gonna beat me down. Well, that's true. It only takes one person to hit you and steal the jewel. Then people will be going after them. You can even let them through and be like, hey, just hit me with a small guy and I won't block. I like that this card promotes and rewards aggression while punishing control-style decks who only run utility creatures instead of the attacking ones. This playstyle is gonna be key in this deck because with each player starting at 40 life, you're gonna need some help. I would scrap doublers like Nirkana Revenant, Crypt Gas because this deck is fairly split between red and black, and Anthem cards like Cage Sun and Gauntlet of Power don't have enough payoff for me either. We won't run much removal because we like the chaotic board states, but interaction is still key if you want to survive. Be sure to include your favorite staples for Rakdos. Something I want to highlight though is Shadow Grange Demon. It was in the Strefon Precon and it gets through indestructible and hexproof against creatures with knockout power, and it gains life in a pinch. A couple of legendary vampires I also recommend are Henrika Domnathi, who acts like a 4-mana value flashbag marauder in that it forces sacrifices, and Drana Calastria Bloodchief. She's a repeatable mana sink that picks off a lot of the small utility creatures. Now, because we want to stay aggressive, a form of removal we can leverage on is Goad. Carder, Vengeful Ancestor, Bloodthirsty Blade, and Loreen all Goad creatures, and the thinking here is, you don't need to get rid of the big threats, you just need to make sure that they don't hit you. Personally, I also tend to not attack the player whose creature I'm goading. In line with our sub-theme, I want to tag team with them instead of just tapping down their blocker. Don't go overboard with these though, this isn't a Goad deck. 1 to 2 pieces, plus cards like Coveted Jewel and some other cards coming up, those will be enough. For card draw, I like to run some of the staples like Night's Whisper. However, because we're promoting aggression, I like having the Monarch in play. Emberwild Captain and the Court of Ambition are Monarch cards I like running, and hopefully, we get more cool ones in the future. Humble Defector promotes that tag team action where you and another player can pass it back and forth, while Karazikar is another one of those goady creatures, but because of its second ability, you sometimes don't even need to trigger that goad clause. Players are greedy for card draw, and it can net you a bunch of cards even over just one turn cycle. Sancha is another engine, and she helps the table collectively draw cards and deal damage against a player that you just can't get through to anymore. We still want cards in our graveyard though, and Unmarked Grave and Buried Alive lets us tutor up the cards we want there. Burning Rune Demon is a big flying beater that also tutors a card while getting something in the graveyard. Now, to get the best of both worlds, this is where you want to help someone out too. For example, people are usually hoping someone has a sweeper, and if you strike a deal, you can get your Blasphemous Act in hand while getting the creature of your choice in your graveyard. An underrated card that I've seen net a lot of value is Moonlight Bargain. For 5 mana, you can cast it at instant speed and it lets you look at the top 5. You can pay 2 life then for each card you want in your hand, otherwise those cards go to the graveyard. It's a great way to refuel while selecting what you want in your hand versus what you want in your graveyard. Looting is an important way to filter through our deck because we don't always want our best creatures in our hand. Faithless Looting and Thrill of Possibility are low mana value loot cards, while Seize the Spoils, Pirate's Pillage, and Unexpected Windfall all draw us positive and they create treasures. Azra Oddsmaker lets us discard a card with the upside of allowing us to draw 2, and it's a fun little sub-game. The 2 versions of Anya lets us loot effectively too. The Falconwrath version lets us discard and draw per turn, even if we aren't running much Madness cards, while the Maid of Dishonor version nets us a blood token that helps us loot later on, while also being a getaway Sanguinate in the late game. For Reanimation, sure our commander does this, but she costs 6. So in the meantime, you want to try and be as efficient as possible. Reanimate, Animate Dead, Persist, and Victimize all have a great rate when it comes to bringing creatures back. These are one-time effects though, so for a repeatable one, Feldon lets us do that for 3 mana. Chainer lets us discard and recast creatures from our graveyard, plus he gives that creature haste. Incarnation Technique flies under the radar, but for me it is a bomb reanimation spell. Opponents might think you have nothing in your yard, but then you mill 10 and you bring 2 back. That is a powerful value play that can swing a game's momentum. Living Death is also another momentum swinger, and it dual hats as a board wipe and a mass reanimation spell. The card that I don't run is Drana, the Last Blood Chief. I know she's got an attack clause in her ability and she's cool in concept, but I've generally been disappointed whenever I played her because she's a little slow. You know, the creature comes back, you can't even choose which one, it's just untapped, it's doing nothing. So yeah, a pass on this one for me. So we've been tag teaming, getting things in the yard. Now it's time for our finishers. Inferno Titan, Grave Titan, and Archon of Cruelty all have enter the battlefield triggers and attack triggers, which brings us a lot of value, especially if they have haste. Meanwhile, Terror of the Peaks and Karvik have static abilities that deal a lot of damage over the course of a game if they aren't dealt with. Etali is an aggressive dino who nets a lot of card advantage whenever it attacks. However, a downside to note is that if we bring Etali back using Olivia, its ability won't trigger because it was never declared as an attacker. This means Olivia only really rewards you in the form of ETBs, or if you're able to connect with an opponent's face. So with that in mind, Necropolis Regent and Hellkite Tyrant have powerful effects attached to them if that happens. Port Razor gives us extra combat steps, and if you can connect successfully with a sack outlet on board, that's pretty much infinite combat steps with Olivia. A card with huge impact if it ever connects is Rakdos the Defiler. This version of Rakdos is a 7/6 demon with flying and trample, and it forces players to sacrifice half their non-demon permanents if it connects. This includes lands. Now, much like Etali, because Rakdos never gets declared an attacker when it's brought back by Olivia, we skip the drawback of its attack trigger. And if we're able to hit with it, whew, watch out. But if you're really looking to bury somebody, Master of Cruelties delivers a Hulkamania-sized leg drop to our opponents. If we bring it back using Olivia's ability, we circumvent the whole can only attack alone clause because it comes in already attacking. Furthermore, with the way the ability is worded, the important clause to pay attention to is the part where it says isn't blocked. If you can get through, that player's life total becomes 1. But here's the kicker. Because Master of Cruelties has first strike, that effect takes place before normal combat damage is dealt. So our opponent goes down a 1, then Olivia kills them off all in the same turn. There's no kicking out from that. Now if you're not comfortable running that ruthless of a combo, here's an alternative. Torgar puts a player to 20 life, regardless of how much they had. At 20, it isn't a game ender, but it puts them within beatdown range. The reason I recommend running these types of effects is because we're trying to win with straight up damage. And so a deck that can gain life consistently or gain burst life out of nowhere can really run away beyond our reach. Speaking of situational, we're going to be running some utility cards to help us deal with different scenarios. Author of Shadows is good graveyard hate that nets us back a powerful spell from our opponents. Thief of Blood helps us deal with super friends hiding behind a pillow fort, as well as controlling those go-wide decks whose creatures are becoming a little bit too beefy. Olivia Mobilize for War and Anger give our creatures haste, with the former being a legendary vampire. And Urabrask does this too, while tapping down potential blockers our opponents might play. Now, if the Praetor is out of budget, I found Grand Melee also does a pretty good job at this because it keeps blockers tapped down, and it forces those annoying utility creatures to unprofitably attack or block. Viscerasir and Yeheni are both really good utility creatures as well, and they're sacrifice outlets too. Conjurer's Closet is a pet card of mine, and it works well with a lot of creatures we're running. Something to note, it also removes the exile this creature clause among creatures that Olivia brings back. Finally, the last pet card I want to highlight is Assault Suit. It's a great tag team card, and nothing spells teamwork like giving your friend an Archon of Cruelty that they can go to town with. These are stats of a real-life play-tested and piloted build of mine. I have my deck clocking in at 11 ramped spells, 8 removal, 10 draw, 8 loot, 8 reanimate, 8 finishers, 10 UBP, and 36 lands. Now that we have an idea of what cards we're running, something new I'm trying out is giving a few tips on how to pilot this deck specifically. I won't cover things like, oh yeah, ramp is good for you, but I'll try to be more specific towards things like when to play the commander, the pitfalls, etc. If you appreciate this or if this video resonated with you, let me know in the comments section, and as always, I do appreciate the likes, the subscribe, so please don't forget to do that. It only takes a second. So first tip, don't rely on Olivia to lead your offense. I know I mentioned Rakdos the Defiler and Master of Cruelties, all this, but really, you only want to be packing one of these because they're so reliant on Olivia, and otherwise, they're kinda trash. Olivia costs 6, so even if you're trying to rush her out, there are probably already scarier things in play. If anything, I find that Olivia works best post-wipe, where her haste and her ability can keep the pressure on. She's second wind, but not likely to be your first burst. Plus, if she dies, you can get 2 for 1 pretty hard, so you're gonna wanna keep her as an ace in your back pocket instead of a go-to. Second tip, stay aggressive. Sounds like a no-brainer, but hear me out. There are gonna be other strong board states throughout the game, and that might scare you into playing defense, but keep turning your creatures sideways, even if it sometimes leaves you open. The reason why is this deck's endgame doesn't snowball the way some other decks would. It sets up fast enough and it delivers consistent value over time, but it lacks that late game power spike. In the spirit of aggression, don't be scared to eat damage as well. If you keep attacking everyone and it's just your life total that's significantly higher than everyone else's, that's gonna draw you a lot of attention that you might not be able to handle. And this brings us to our last tip, team up. This deck usually picks up in the mid game and can even get off to some explosive turn 2 or turn 3 starts. Regardless, dealing 120 damage to your opponents without infinites is always gonna be difficult. This is why we really wanna leverage on the tag team cards we have. Align yourself with another aggressive deck and deal with the other players first, like the control player or the stacks player or the combo player. Don't remove a scary creature just because you can. Revel in the bloodshed and try to eke out a hard-fought and well-deserved win. And that does it for this episode. Sorry it took me a while. I was having trouble with my laptop. I had to deal with the real-life stuff that, we all sometimes gotta deal with. But I think everything's pretty much sorted out, and I'm glad to be back. I got myself a new mic, so hopefully you guys are enjoying the better voice quality. If you enjoyed this video or if you enjoyed this playstyle, leave me a like or a comment, and I always appreciate a subscribe. Share it with your friends too, because, I don't know, we're all just friends here, right? Right? Thanks for watching, and hopefully it won't be too long until my next one. If you do want me to check out a commander, just let me know. Until then, see ya, pals!